So I just opened Blender, and when you open Blender for the first time, this is what you're gonna see, except for the recent files. If you have never used Blender before, you can just ignore this pop-up and click somewhere outside of it, and this is what you are going to see. There's a bunch of objects here. We have a cube, you can click on it. There's a light and there's a camera, but we don't need any of this, so we can come here to the scene collection, select everything, and hit X on the keyboard to delete them. Or I think we can delete them here. Yeah, we can just right click and click delete. I'm gonna try my best not to use shortcuts unless there's something that you cannot do unless you use a shortcut. Yeah, so let's talk about navigation for a second, because I do have some settings that I usually enable for easier navigation. So by default, I think you have to click the middle mouse button and move it around to rotate the scene. And then if you hold shift and click the middle mouse button, then you are going to pan. And to zoom in and out, you can use the mouse wheel. So that's how the default navigation in Blender is. But I do enable some settings. So if we go to Edit Preferences and then go down to Navigation, the first setting that I enabled is called Orbit Around Selection. This is very useful. So if you have selected your lure, for example, and then you're trying to orbit or to rotate the scene, you want it to rotate around your lure. And the second thing is in input. So under input, there's something called emulate 3-button mouse. So this is a bit hard to explain, but if you're planning to use Blender for fishing lures, at some point in the future, you're gonna have to invest in a tablet, in a sculpting tablet. And yeah, if you're used to navigation using your mouse, it's gonna make it a lot easier. So let me explain what this does. So instead of using the middle mouse button, we're now gonna use the left mouse button, the normal one, the one you use for selection and all this stuff. And if we hold down Alt on the keyboard and now click with our mouse button and move, not the middle one, the left one, it's gonna orbit. So if we remove Alt, it's gonna go back to default. If we hold Alt, it's going to orbit. Now, if we hold Alt and Shift, then it is going to pan. And then if we hold Alt and Control, we can use it to zoom in and out. So now I'm only using one mouse key, which is this one, and everything else is being controlled by the keyboard. Now you don't have to use this. You can stick to the middle mouse key and the shift if you're more comfortable with that, but I prefer to use the 3-button navigation because I sometimes do sculpting and I use a tablet, so it's a lot easier to navigate like that with the tablet. I'm already used to it. Cool. So I recommend to practice navigation. Give it like 5-10 minutes and you should get used to it like pretty fast. And then once you know how to navigate and move around, we can start adding stuff. So to create a lure, I usually, most of the time, like 99% of the time, I start with a cube. So how do we add a cube? So there is a shortcut, but as I said, I don't want to use too many shortcuts. So if we go up here, there's a tab bar and there's a button called add or a menu called add. And if we click on that, we have lots of options. What we're interested in is a mesh and a cube. And this will give us our cube. Now, before we start to create the shape of our lure, I personally create fishing lures so I can 3D print them. So I want to define the length of my lure. And to do that, there is a menu which is hidden at the moment, and it's right here. Now to show this menu, you can click N on the keyboard, or I also believe you can click this tiny arrow up here. Yeah, it's super tiny. But yeah, if you click N on the keyboard, it's gonna show it. And it has a bunch of options. Some of you might not have some of them, but we'll get to that later. So at the top, if we click on the item menu, we can see down here right at the end, we have dimensions. So we have X, Y, and Z dimensions. What are these? So if you look here in our scene, there's some sort of a grid, and we can see a red line and a green line, and there's also a blue line, but it's not showing. You can check them right here. So X is the red one, Y is the green one, and Z is the blue one. So what I usually do is I take the Y and I increase it. So you can like hold it and go left and right to increase it and decrease it, or you can click one time and then enter a number. Now, what is this number? So even though the unit here says it's meters, for 3D printing, it's actually not. So a unit in Blender is a unit. Technically, it's not actually a meter. But when you export as an STL, this unit will become a millimeter. So if I want to make a lure that is, let's say, 12 centimeters, I want to put 120 here. So 120 millimeters, for example. Or if I want something that is 100 millimeters or 10 centimeters, I will put 100 here. And if we zoom out a bit, we can see it. Now, there is a way to change these units if you want to work in inches or whatever. I haven't tested that, but it's somewhere here in the settings, in the scene settings, I think. But anyways, I usually work with millimeters, so I don't bother. Before we continue, I just want to say that I have enabled channel memberships. So if you would like to support my channel and also gain access to exclusive perks like loyalty badges, early access to videos, member-only videos, and even member-only live streams, check out my membership by clicking the join button next to the subscribe button. And if you can't find that join button on an iPhone or a phone for some reason, check it out on a computer. It works a lot better on a computer. Thank you for considering supporting my channel, and now we can go back to the video. So now we have a 100 millimeter length. We can bump the height a bit of the Z and maybe the X also. Now, if you notice at the top, the scale is changing. So the scale on the y-axis is 50 now. On the Z, it's like 10 and so on. Usually, most of the time, you want to keep the scale at 1 with Blender. If you're facing some issues with Booleans, I don't think Booleans cause issues, but some operations that we're gonna do later in this video, if the scale was not 1, you're gonna face some issues. So what you want to do is select your object, and we want to apply the scale. Now, usually I use a shortcut. I don't know how to get it here, to be honest. So the shortcut is Control A, and then you're gonna get a menu like this called Apply, and then you select Scale, and it's gonna show up here. Now, I'm sure there's a way to apply scale somewhere from here. I just don't know where the button is, so I use the shortcut. Cool. So we have a block. How do we turn it into a fishing lure? Cool. So we are gonna now talk about how Blender works, like what is a mesh, and how can we turn this block or this box into a shape that resembles a fish, for example. So if you notice here at the top, we're in object mode, something called object mode. If we click our box and then go and change this, so we click on it and change to edit mode, this is what's gonna happen. Now we are seeing some overlays on top of our box or cube. It's no longer a cube, but anyways. And we can see some points. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points, and there are more. So 2 more here, 8 points in total. And these are what forms a mesh. They are called vertices. So the way a mesh works, you have a bunch of vertices, and these vertices are connected together to form a face. So let me explain what I mean. Right next to edit mode, we have select mode. So right now we are in vertex select mode. So we can select these vertices, and we can go to edge select, and now we can only select edges. So what are edges? An edge is any two vertices that are connected together. They are connected through an edge. We can see the edges being highlighted. This is edge select mode. And there's one more mode called face select. So a face is anytime you have three or more edges connected together, they form a face. So this is called a face. So what is a mesh? A mesh is a bunch of vertices that are connected together to form faces. And we can view some statistics actually about this mesh. So if we click up here, right at the arrow next to this icon, there's something called, or sorry, this icon right here, my bad. There's an option called statistics. So if we enable this, we can see that, okay, the cube is currently selected. We have 8 vertices, 12 edges, and 6 faces. So we can even, for example, select an edge, and it will tell us, oh, one edge is selected and 2 vertices are selected because this edge is 2 vertices. So now we know what a mesh is. And by the way, to switch between these 3 modes, you can select, you can click the numbers 1, 2, 3 on your keyboard. So 1 is for vertices, 2 is for edges, and 3 for faces. Nice. So yeah, how do we turn this into a fishing lure? We still haven't done that. So at the moment, this is a block. We want to make it smooth somehow, give it like some nice curves. And before we do that, actually, let me explain symmetry because it's super important. So if we come here at the top, there's something called symmetry, but for some reason it's not showing a label. But anyways, it looks like a butterfly, and right next to it there's X, Y, and Z, and they are all disabled. So you can enable them, but by default they are disabled. And we know that X is the red one, right? And we want our lure to be symmetric on the X axis. So anything that happens here should also happen on the other side. So if we turn on X and now we do something, look at that. It's now symmetric. I'll explain how I'm moving stuff in a bit, but for now, we want this symmetry to be enabled, sorry. Cool. Now let's talk about subdivisions. So as I said, this cube currently is a block. So if we come here to the modifiers tab, so in this menu right here, there's a tab called modifiers. If we click on it, we will get a new button called add modifier. So if we click that, and then we need to search for subdivisions. So subdivision surface. If we click on that, something weird is going to happen. So the reason it looks like this at the moment is because we only have one subdivision right here in the level viewport. But if we increase that, let's say to 4 or 5, first of all, if you look at our statistics, we used to have how many faces? 6. Now we have 6,000 faces. So if we zoom in on it and take a look, now we have lots and lots of faces. So the way this works is it takes our faces and it subdivides them into smaller and smaller faces, but it also smooths everything down. Sorry, this is a hard word for me. So yeah, it has 2 modes. So if we check simple, it's just gonna keep everything as it is, just makes the faces smaller. But we want to use this one, Cutmole Clark. weird name, but yeah. We can even go to 6 to make it like really super smooth. So yeah, if we go back to edit mode, by the way, you can go from object mode to edit mode by clicking tab on the keyboard. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about a new concept called edge loops. So as you remember, we have our edges, but what if I want to add more edges? So how can I do that? There's a tool called edge loops, and I believe it's here somewhere, or it's called loop cut. Sorry, my bad. So loop cut creates edge loops. So if we click on this tool right here, loop cut, and then put our mouse somewhere, we're gonna see this yellow line. I haven't clicked anything yet. And if we move it, it might change its location. You can add a loop here, you can add a loop here, or add a loop in the middle. And if you use the mouse wheel, it doesn't work. Interesting. I'm wondering why. Let me check something. If we go back here, okay, it works here, but it doesn't work here. Anyways, yeah, you can change it here, number of cuts at the top. So if you add 2 cuts, you're gonna get 2, but the UI is a bit weird. I don't know why this happens. Let's keep it at 1 and put it here. Yeah, so that's how you can create a loop cut. However, the way I suggest you can do it is you click Ctrl R, similar to how you would refresh a page, for example, on a browser, Ctrl R, and then you can add a loop cut and you can move it. So once you click on your mouse, it's gonna add the loop cut, but if you move your mouse, it's gonna move. You can put it wherever you want and then click again, and now it's here. You can do the exact same thing. So I did a Ctrl Z, I reverted. You can do the exact same thing here, but it's a bit more involving because you have to place the loop cut, go back to select box, and double click on the G to move it. So yeah, let's just, I would recommend you to memorize this shortcut Ctrl R, because you're gonna use it a lot. So Ctrl R, let's put one here and move it to the front, maybe the third, around the third of the lure, like right here. And maybe also let's add a loop cut at the top. So if we rotate like this, Ctrl R and click here, but do not move it, just click escape. So escape or right click anywhere to cancel, so it doesn't move. So we want this one to be in the middle. We don't want it to move. And let's also add one more loop cut. Maybe put it back here somewhere, or let's put it in the middle. Cool. So this is what we have at the moment. It looks nothing like a lure yet. But now we're gonna start modifying it to look more like a fishing lure. So I'm gonna exit out of edit mode just to show you some tips and tricks on how to move objects. So again, Blender uses lots of shortcuts and you don't have to learn them. They will make you faster, but again, you don't have to learn them. Like for example, G, you can move stuff. S, you can scale, and R, you can rotate. But now regarding scale, for example, and stuff, you can do them here. Same for rotation, and even moving stuff. You can do it also from here. But another thing you can do is if you go now to this icon, it's called gizmos, and you can enable the move gizmo and the rotate gizmo and the scale gizmo. So now we have these arrows. So for example, if I click on this blue arrow and move it up, it's gonna move my object up. Same for the red one or the green one, and I can scale using this box here Now I'm gonna make it bigger or smaller. What else? I can rotate my lure and so on. And this also works in edit mode. So if you go to edit mode and select the vertex, now I can move this vertex. And the same if I select the face, for example, I can move this face down. So we're gonna use this to create the shape of our lure. So let's start first by creating the side profile, and then we're gonna move to the top profile and do that. So to work on the side profile, what I recommend doing is to click on this X here at the top in the gizmo. So if you click on the X, you're gonna go into side view, which I think is also called orthographic mode or something like that. Yeah, right, orthographic. And now we're looking at our object directly from the right, so from the side. And I'm gonna enable one more thing. Under the subdivision, there's an option that is disabled by default called on cage. If we select that, you can see that everything changed now. So we no longer have a box, the box disappeared, and now all the edges and vertices, they are right on the on our shape. So you can see them here, you can see this edge, you can select this edge, for example. And if we go back to our right view, we can, for example, let's say, let's select this face and move them down a bit. And let's go to edge select this edge and pull it up. Just an example, let's pull this edge down. And now we can play around with our shape. Maybe pull this up a bit. Let's select this and shift. So if you hold shift and select something else, you're basically selecting two things at the same time. So select this edge, shift select this edge, and move them down just a bit. Then select just the back one and move it down. Now we're gonna fix whatever is going on here in a bit. Let's select this edge and pull it down even more. And now we're starting to get something that looks like a traditional lure. And since we have symmetry enabled, even though I'm only moving this edge right here, both of them are being moved the exact same way. Let's maybe raise this up a bit, not too much though. Okay. This looks fine. I mean, this already looks like a lure. It's like a flat-sided lure. You don't even have to do the top profile, but we will do it. But I think I'm gonna make this a bit bigger. Something like that. Cool. Now we can click on the Z. So we were on the right view. So if we click on the Z, now we get the top view, and we can select. Now we can move using the red arrow. Not too much though. And now we can go back, and I'm gonna select this edge and this edge, and let's move them a bit, and then I will select only the back one and move it a bit more, maybe even a bit more. We don't have to taper it too much. And yeah, that's basically our lure. Now our lure is very thin at the moment. So if we click tab to go out of edit mode, so we were in edit mode, we went to object mode, and we want to make it a bit bigger, we can go here and scale it on the X. Let's make it 20 or maybe 18. I think 18 mils maybe a bit more. Yeah, 20. This is a big lure. Okay, cool. Don't forget to apply the scale because the scale now is no longer 1, it's 1.3. So apply the scale. And yeah, now it's looking a lot nicer. Now another thing we can do is I think we can get rid of the on cage thing for now. We can add another loop cut here. Again, Control R to add a loop cut. Click here and look at how it affects the back part. So the way loop cuts work, when you have an edge like this or a face like this one here and there's nothing after it, the subdivision is gonna smooth it out, right? It's gonna create this rounded edge right here. Now the way we can control this is by adding a loop cut. So the more cuts you have that are closer to each other, tighter to each other, the sharper the transition is gonna be. So the more I move this towards the back, look at how sharp it gets. And then if I move it away, now the part that is right here is getting sharper, but the part at the back was getting smoother. So we can pull this back, not all the way, but for example till here. And now let's put it back on cage. Look how nicer this is now. It's way nicer. Another thing you can do is if you're looking to create the teardrop shape, what I like to do usually is, first of all, I can select, let's say, these two edges and maybe lift them up a bit and then pull them inwards. You might want to play around with it, see what works for you. It doesn't work for every lure, but I think it's working fine for this one. Maybe we can pull this up just a bit. Let's see how it looks. Yeah, you can see at the top it's wider, and then here it's rounding up more. We can do it even further by selecting only this vertex and pull it in. But you don't want this to be super narrow because you want to put some weight in here. So yeah, you have to play around with it. But yeah, now you know how to do it. So this is what we ended up with. And usually this takes like 5-10 minutes max. But now since I'm explaining everything and I'm not using too much shortcuts, it might take more. But now this on its own, it's not a lure. So it's missing lots of stuff, right? It's missing attachment for the hardware, like the screw eyes or whatever you're going to use as hardware. It's missing weight chambers or weight holes. And it's missing the eye sockets. I just finished editing the video and it's 1 hour long. So I'm gonna split it into 2 parts. Thank you so much for viewing part 1. Don't forget to subscribe. The button is down below. And see you in part 2.